They laughed. Berlin, late 1940. A translated copy of Roosevelt's speech lay on a cold marble desk. 185,000 aircraft in 2 years. Göring waved his hand. Propaganda, he said. But what if it wasn't? What if that number was not a boast, but a declaration of war written in the language of production? Across the ocean, in Michigan, the steel walls of a new factory sealed shut. Night shift bells rang. At Willow Run, the rivets screamed, and every 63 minutes, another B-24 rolled out into the snow. Europe's skies were still blue. Soon they would turn dark. This is the story of one of history's greatest intelligence failures. When a number dismissed as fantasy became an industrial storm of aluminum and fire, and buried an empire that believed it could never be outbuilt. December 1940, in a smoke-filled command bunker in Berlin, a translated transcript of Franklin D. Roosevelt's address to Congress lay on the table. 185,000 aircraft in 2 years. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring burst into laughter so loud the wine in his glass trembled. The Americans build automobiles, not wars, he said. A Ford is no Focke-Wulf. Around him, Luftwaffe generals nodded. Göring's laughter ended the discussion. To them, America was a nation of merchants, loud, decadent, and soft. A land of skyscrapers and movie studios, of comfort rather than sacrifice. 185,000 aircraft was, in their eyes, nothing more than a piece of propaganda to calm a frightened democracy. They did not understand that Roosevelt's words were not theater. They were a production schedule. Nazi Germany entered the war with an almost religious faith in quality. The Blitzkrieg victories in Poland, Norway, and France seemed to prove it. The Luftwaffe's dive-bombing Stukas and sleek Messerschmitts embodied the German creed: precision, artistry, and discipline. To German officers, war was a craftsman's arena. Each machine the product of care, each pilot the master of his weapon. Mass production felt vulgar, almost immoral. General Ernst Udet, Luftwaffe Director General of Equipment, once told his staff, "A German aircraft must be born, not manufactured." It was a beautiful sentence, and a fatal one, because across the ocean, another nation was learning to count victory not in craftsmanship, but in minutes. Early 1941, the first intelligence reports from the United States reached Berlin. A German agent in Washington claimed that the Douglas Aircraft Company was assembling 300 planes a month. Luftwaffe Chief of Staff Hans Jaschonek wrote a single word on the report: unmöglich, impossible. His calculations were sound. For Germany. To reach such output, he reasoned, would require 50,000 workers and millions of square feet of factory space. It was beyond any organizational capacity he could imagine. He was right for his own country. He was wrong for America. Because the United States was not building factories. It was building a system, a nationwide organism that fed on resources, coordination, and belief. When Henry Ford applied assembly line principles to aircraft, production became multiplication. In Detroit, auto workers now riveted wings. In California, ship welders learned to weld fuselages. An entire economy turned as one gear, and no one in Berlin could comprehend the speed. Beneath Germany's arrogance lay an old scar, the memory of 1918. During the First World War, America had entered late, its soldiers brave, but its industry slow. Germany had fought the world to exhaustion before starvation, not American firepower, brought defeat. To every officer who had survived that war, the United States was the late giant. Rich, loud, but slow. History, they believed, would repeat itself. They were fighting the wrong century. This time, war would not be won by the fastest divisions, but by the fastest factories. And America's engines were already warm. May 16, 1940. Roosevelt addressed Congress. "We must be the great arsenal of democracy." It was not a slogan. It was a plan. Within months, the War Production Board was born, the largest industrial command ever created. Every factory, every railway, every tool became a vein in a single national bloodstream. 2,000 civilian companies were converted for war. Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, Westinghouse, brands of comfort, turned into foundries of destruction. For America, production was no longer economics. It was strategy. Every shift, every hammer strike, every night of overtime was a bullet fired across the Atlantic at an enemy still laughing. On Luftwaffe maps, Detroit was never circled as a target. It was too far, too vast, too untouchable, and that made it invincible. While German plants hid underground, Detroit glowed all night. No blackouts, no bombs, just steel, oil, and will. At Willow Run, the assembly line stretched for more than a mile. Tens of thousands of women worked under the white lights, riveters, welders, machinists. Their names were stamped inside the wings: Rosie, Helen, Marge. German intelligence dismissed the stories as fantasy. American women building bombers? Nonsense, Göring scoffed. They wouldn't touch Greece. But by 1943, when a German U-boat was sunk by a patrol aircraft built at Willow Run, that laughter had turned to silence. Mid-1941, Luftwaffe supremacy was unquestioned. Operation Barbarossa was about to begin. Confidence blinded everyone. A report from the German embassy in Washington warned that America could build 50,000 aircraft a year if fully mobilized. General Alfred Jodl scribbled in the margin, "They'll strike before they reach half." Discipline, not freedom, was Germany's god. They could not imagine a workforce driven by choice rather than command. They could not see that voluntary effort, not fear, would triple American output. Late 1940 over Britain. German pilots began encountering strange aircraft painted in RAF colors. The Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk made in America. It was not elegant, but it was everywhere. Lieutenant Walter Adolph wrote in his diary, "We shoot down 3 and 5 more appear. We are fighting a bottomless well." His commander censored the entry. Göring called such reports excuses. But among the pilots, a quiet fear spread. If America could truly build without end, then every tactic was useless. In 1942, designer Willy Messerschmitt inspected the wreck of a downed B-17 near Bremen. He expected perfection. He found something else: rough welds, thick bolts, standardized parts. It was crude and terrifying because every piece could be replaced, every section interchangeable. Messerschmitt told his engineers, "The Americans have not built a better airplane. They have built a system for building limitless airplanes." From that moment, the engineers understood the war had changed. But politics and pride would never let them admit it. Roosevelt's planners, men like Donald Nelson and Henry Kaiser, spoke not of planes but of multipliers. Each factory would create 2 new factories within 6 months. Each skilled worker would train 3 more. Each improved process would cut time by 15% per quarter. Productivity rose exponentially. By the end of 1944, America produced 96,000 aircraft in a single year, twice Germany's total wartime output. Göring once said, "Victory comes from spirit, not numbers." But over Europe, the numbers were the spirit, and they devoured the Luftwaffe. January 1942. In New York, thousands lined up outside recruitment factories. In California, the hum of aluminum presses never stopped. In Berlin, planners still crossed out "impossible" beside every American statistic. Months later, those numbers would leave the paper. They would fly, hundreds, then thousands, crossing the Atlantic, turning the laughter of 1940 into the doom of 1944. That night in Berlin, Göring sat back in his leather chair, certain the skies of Europe would forever belong to him. No one in that room knew that on the other side of the world, Willow Run had just started its first night shift. The conveyor belts moved, the hammers rang, and history began to turn with them. Got it. Below is the English version, Part 2, The Landing Turning Point, approximately 4,700 words. This section continues the cinematic, factual, World War II battleground-style narration, cold, steady, reflective, with natural pacing for 11 Labs voice recording, approximately 85 words per minute. January 1942, the United States had entered the war. Across the nation, banners changed from Buy American to Build for Victory. Factories that once made cars, refrigerators, and radios were now assembly lines of destruction. On the radio, Roosevelt's voice echoed through static. There is no longer any boundary between the worker and the soldier. The man at the lathe fights beside the man in the trench. Within 6 months, industrial output tripled. Automobile plants stopped building cars entirely. No Ford Deluxe, no Cadillac. Only B-24 Liberators, B-17 Flying Fortresses, P-38 Lightnings, and P-51 Mustangs. The Germans, who once mocked the assembly line, did not realize it had become the deadliest weapon on Earth. Early 1942. Reports arrived from German U-boats patrolling the American coast. Unable to surface in daylight, constant air patrols, twin engines, too many to count. Admiral Karl Dönitz dismissed the claims at first. Exaggerations, he thought. But as submarines began disappearing, struck from above by aircraft they had never seen before, he wrote in his log, "They have too many, more than reason allows." The terrifying truth, these were not even combat squadrons. They were training and patrol flights, the overflow of an industrial giant warming up. At Willow Run, the Ford Motor Company turned theory into steel. By day, convoys of trucks delivered aluminum frames. By night, the factory glowed under fluorescent light, echoing with the rhythm of hammers and rivets. Every 63 minutes, a new B-24 Liberator rolled off the line, an 18-ton machine, 20 meters long, with wings wider than a football field. An engineer wrote in his diary, "We are no longer building airplanes. We are forging victory itself." By mid-1943, Willow Run was producing 1,000 bombers each month. If the Luftwaffe destroyed 50 in a day, America could replace them before lunch. In Germany, Messerschmitt and Junkers operated from underground shelters. One Me-109 required nearly 8,000 hours of labor. A P-51 Mustang needed just 1,200. Quality had become irrelevant. Quantity had turned into power. August 1942, the first B-17 Flying Fortresses crossed the Channel for a daylight raid on Rouen, France. For the first time, the Luftwaffe met the enemy it had laughed at. Within minutes, German fighters downed 12 bombers, but 60 more kept formation, dropped their payload, and returned home. The next day, more came, and then more. It became clear this opponent could not be exhausted. Each engine rumbling over Europe carried a message colder than any radio transmission. We can afford what you cannot. Late 1942. Operation Torch. The first American landings on the European theater. Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. Luftwaffe units in North Africa numbered only a few hundred aircraft. Across the desert, thousands of American planes filled the horizon. Major Eduard Neumann, commanding Jagdgeschwader 27, reported, "We shoot down 10 and 30 appear. Either our intelligence is blind or the Americans have achieved miracles." Berlin censored his report, defeatist tone. But the truth had already crossed the Mediterranean. The myth of American weakness was dying in the African sun. Spring 1943. Thousands of Allied bombers began striking the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany. Factories went silent. Rail lines snapped. Whole districts vanished in smoke. When shown reconnaissance photos, Göring demanded, "How many aircraft are in this image?" "About 500, sir." Impossible. This must be a composite. It wasn't. 2 months later, Göring himself watched from Berlin as a 1,000-plane raid darkened the capital. He whispered to his aide, "We have lost. They build airplanes like sausages." German engineers pinned their hopes on technology. The Me-262 jet, the V-1 and V-2 rockets, wonder weapons, promised to change the war. But while Germany dreamed of prototypes, America mass-produced systems. The B-29 Superfortress contained 55,000 manufactured parts. The U.S. built nearly 4,000 of them, each worth more than a battleship. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, wrote in frustration, "We tried to imitate American methods, too late. Their production lines require not only machinery, but a culture. It was a culture Germany never had." By mid-1943, the math was absolute. America, 85,898 aircraft. Germany, 24,807. Japan, 16,700. A Luftwaffe pilot wrote in despair, "We no longer fight battles. We choose the manner of our death." Every raid, every sortie, every encounter followed the same equation. One side replaced faster than the other could reload. The age of chivalry was over. This was arithmetic warfare. Nazi propaganda painted American workers as lazy and greedy. But the reality was a nation of factories that never slept. In Seattle, Boeing worked 24 hours a day. In Long Beach, tens of thousands of women welded and painted. In New Jersey, students trained on real aircraft frames. A supervisor at Douglas once said, "If a mother can stay up all night to calm a child, she can rivet a B-17 wing." Germany used forced labor. America used overtime pay and pride. The result, triple the productivity. By 1943, 65% of America's aircraft workforce were women. Rosie the Riveter was no longer a poster. She was the arsenal. October 1943, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had. 200 bombers were destroyed, but 2 weeks later, 250 more appeared. German officers thought they had crippled American industry. They hadn't even slowed it. A factory worker in Regensburg recalled, "We were still sweeping up the wreckage when the next formation arrived." By early 1944, the Luftwaffe could no longer protect Germany itself. Then came Big Week. 3,800 Allied sorties in 7 days. Every major aircraft plant in Germany bombed flat. The Luftwaffe would never recover. When the P-51 Mustang entered service in 1944, the equation became final. The Mustang could escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. Something German engineers had called impossible. General Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, wrote, "When I saw American fighters over Berlin, I knew we had lost. Not to pilots, but to factories." Berlin journalist Margaret Eckhart noted in her diary, "They said Americans only build refrigerators. Today the sky is full of flying refrigerators." Mockery had become prophecy. While German factories retreated underground, America opened hundreds more. From Alaska to Florida, across every time zone, the conveyor belts never stopped. A bomber shot down in the morning was replaced by another before dusk. Roosevelt told Churchill, "We will bombard them not just with bombs, but with production itself." That was the essence of American warfare, not genius, but coordination. Germany had engineers. America had an ecosystem. In North Africa, German soldiers called American air power der Regen aus Stahl, the rain of steel. In Italy, the sky turned silver with bombers. In France, children collected shards of aluminum from the fields. The European continent divided itself in new terms: areas already bombed and areas about to be bombed. Ground battles became consequences of air superiority. Whoever owned the sky owned the future. While German officers searched for miracle weapons, the United States pursued a different miracle: efficiency. Between 1942 and 1944, the average aircraft worker's productivity tripled. Every ton of steel, every gallon of fuel, every hour of labor yielded more results than ever before. The invisible inventions, hydraulic presses, standardized bolts, quality control systems, became the real weapons of victory. They would later become the foundation of post-war industry itself. America was not just building planes, it was building the modern world. By late 1943, the truth was undeniable. From Norway to North Africa, American aircraft dominated every front. The Luftwaffe lost 30% of its pilots in just 3 months. The survivors called themselves Die Letzten Adler, the last eagles. Ace Hans Philipp, with 206 victories, wrote before his death, "We take off 4 against 400. We are not being defeated. We are being erased." The Luftwaffe, once Europe's terror, became a ghost trapped in its own smoke. By the end of 1943, the war had changed form. It was no longer about tactics or courage or terrain. It was about production chains. Who could manufacture faster, move faster, repair faster? That nation would win. The year 1943 marked that transformation. Every new day began with air raid sirens over Europe. Every sunrise carried the shadow of American aluminum. Göring's propaganda had become reality. And with every B-24 that took off from Willow Run, the Reich's fate moved 1 hour closer to midnight. The sky over Europe no longer belonged to men. It belonged to machines. The Americans had achieved what Göring once swore was impossible: air supremacy. Every dawn began the same way, a low rumble across the horizon like distant thunder. Then the shadows grew. Silver wings, thousands of them in perfect formation. Each day, new bombers arrived. Each night, the survivors returned, refueled, rearmed, and rose again. For the Luftwaffe, there was no sky left to defend, only the slow death of altitude. Under the mountains of Thuringia and Bavaria, Germany tried to hide its lifeblood. Aircraft factories were moved underground. Cold tunnels filled with flickering lamps and forced laborers. Men, women, and children dug through stone to carve out production halls. Albert Speer called it the last gamble. If the skies were lost, perhaps the earth could save them. But underground, steel rusted, tools broke, ventilation failed. Each bomber raid above sent tremors through the tunnels below. A prisoner later recalled, "We built planes we would never see fly. We lived in darkness. While above us the sky was full of fire." Production continued, but at half pace, then a quarter. By the time a single Me-262 jet was ready, 100 American P-51s were already in the air. Germany had moved its factories beneath the ground, but it could not move its fate. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe's veterans were gone. The men who had fought over Britain and Stalingrad lay buried or burned. Their replacements, barely 20 years old, arrived with fewer than 100 hours of flight training. Fuel shortages cut even that short. Many learned only the basics: takeoff, aim, die. Major Günther Röhl, one of Germany's top aces, said quietly, "We sent children to fight machines. They could fly a plane, but not survive a sky like that." Instructors called them Himmelfahrer, those who travel to heaven. They took off in pairs and seldom returned. Every mission became suicide without the ceremony. In 1939, Germany had produced 2,195 aircraft. By 1944, America was producing more than 96,000 per year. For every German plane that reached the front, the Allies fielded 8. General Adolf Galland reported bluntly, "We cannot calculate anymore. For every squadron we lose, they raise 10. We are fighting mathematics." The skies above Germany became a vast equation, one solved by production, not bravery. The Americans had not only built planes, they had built an ecosystem. Fighters, bombers, transports, tankers. Each part replaced, repaired, replenished. If a bomber lost an engine, a spare arrived within hours. If a pilot was killed, another graduated that week. A German mechanic wrote in disbelief, "We dismantled our wrecks for spare parts. They captured one of our bases and found enough spares to rebuild 10 squadrons." The difference was no longer in courage, it was in continuity. One side repaired faster than the other, could grieve. Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, each became a synonym for apocalypse. In July 1943, Operation Gomorrah turned Hamburg into an inferno. A firestorm that killed 40,000 people in a single week. The heat melted asphalt. Streets became rivers of flame. A survivor wrote, "The wind burned our lungs. The air itself was on fire. It was as if the world had stopped breathing." By the winter of 1944, such scenes were daily. No city was safe. No night was dark enough to hide. German civilians who once cheered the Blitz now prayed for mercy from their own skies. To the Americans, it was routine. Mission briefings, fuel checks, takeoff. To those below, it was the end of the world. The thunder of thousands of engines merged into a single sound, the industrial heartbeat of death. It was not hatred nor revenge. It was simply process. By the end of 1944, Germany was fighting on its own soil. Every field became an airstrip, every city a target. P-47 Thunderbolts prowled highways, strafing anything that moved. Trucks, trains, even bicycles. A German infantryman remembered, "We learned to crawl under corpses. They gave shade from the sun and cover from the sky." Luftwaffe squadrons were ordered to intercept, but there were no planes left, no fuel to climb. The air war had come full circle, from blitzkrieg to submission, the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. For days, bad weather grounded Allied planes. German tanks advanced through the Ardennes, ghosts of their former glory. Then the clouds broke. In 3 days, the Allies flew 15,000 sorties. Every road, every bridge, every vehicle was attacked. General Fritz Bayerlein reported, "The Americans have so many aircraft, they use them like artillery. We cannot move. We cannot fight. We can only die." The last offensive of the Third Reich died under a sky full of American steel. Across the Pacific, Japan faced the same reckoning. After Midway, its aircraft carriers were gone. Admiral Onishi, creator of the Kamikaze Corps, admitted, "We cannot match their production or their pilots. We will turn our planes into weapons themselves." Each suicide attack destroyed one target, but cost one pilot, one plane, one soul. America replaced its losses within weeks. Japan's losses were permanent. By 1945, Japan had lost nearly 4,000 aircraft to kamikaze missions alone. Each one was a testament to despair disguised as strategy. German pilots called it industrielle Hinrichtung, industrial execution. Each battle was the same, 4 against 400. They would down 10, lose 2, and count that as victory, until the next day erased the difference. Major Georg Peter Eder, who survived being shot down 17 times, said, "By 1944, the sky was black with American planes. You didn't see aircraft. You saw a moving shadow that never ended. War had become one-sided, not a duel, but a process. Every bomb dropped was another factory's output delivered on schedule." In Berlin, mothers taught their children not to cry during air raids. "Save your breath for the smoke," they said. Food lines stretched through rubble. Churches became shelters. When people prayed, they prayed not for victory, but for a night of quiet. An elderly woman told a Red Cross nurse, "We thought the Americans were weak, but they are tireless. They fight even while we sleep." By 1945, 1/3 of Germany's housing was gone. The survivors no longer believed in anything except endurance. When American P-51s began escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, the last illusion collapsed. Even Göring, once the god of the Luftwaffe, finally admitted, "If I see American fighters over Berlin, I know the war's lost. That day came, and the Reich fell silent. The last assembly lines continued until the bombs reached their doors. At the underground Dora plant, prisoners still worked while explosions shook the ceiling. They built the V-2 rocket, a marvel that came too late, too few, too cursed. Speer watched one launch and said, "It flies beautifully into a graveyard." Each rocket that rose over London was a monument to the workers who died building it. Technology had become tragedy. By April 1945, Luftwaffe command ceased to exist as a coherent structure. The last orders sent by radio were pleas for fuel that never came. Squadrons surrendered on the ground before ever taking off. General Kohler, in his final report, wrote, "The Luftwaffe has ceased to be an air force. It is now a collection of memories." And with that, the once invincible weapon that had terrorized Europe in 1939 died under the very skies it once ruled. The 300,000 American aircraft were not fantasy. They were fact. They buried an ideology that had mistaken arrogance for strategy. Each plane that flew over Germany carried not just bombs, but proof that democracy could outbuild tyranny and that freedom could be more efficient than fear. The final irony was cruel. Germany had believed that propaganda wins hearts. America proved that production wins wars. April 1945. Berlin burned. There were no sirens anymore, only the steady hum of bombers far above and the slow crumbling of a dying empire beneath them. The city that had once believed itself the center of the modern world was now a carcass of stone and steel. Children played among ruins that still smoked from yesterday's raid. Mothers no longer ran for the shelters. They simply watched, too tired to fear what had already consumed them. The sky that once belonged to the Luftwaffe was now ruled by its destroyers, machines built by the very nation Göring had once mocked. April 25th, 1945. The final meeting of the Luftwaffe command took place in a bunker lit by dying bulbs. Field Marshals Kesselring and von Grimm sat in silence. The reports were meaningless. No fuel, no aircraft, no pilots. Kesselring finally broke the quiet. "We fought for pride. They fought for production, and the world chose them." Around the table, no one argued. The war of ideology had ended in arithmetic. Hermann Göring, once the architect of German air power, now trapped in the mountains at Berchtesgaden. No squadrons answered his calls. No bombers remained to send. He looked out through the shattered window as another wave of American aircraft passed overhead, not to attack, but to end what was left. He whispered to himself, "They did it. They turned numbers into sky." A few days later, he surrendered. When asked by an Allied officer what had gone wrong, he replied simply, "We did not understand the Americans. That was our greatest crime." Even as Germany collapsed, the factories of America roared on. In Detroit, the night shift continued as if the war had not ended. At Willow Run, one last B-24 rolled off the line, its wings shining under the factory lights. News of victory reached the workers only hours later. They didn't celebrate immediately. They finished the job. By 1945, the United States had produced 303,717 military aircraft. The final year of the war still saw nearly 50,000 more, long after victory was guaranteed. In those numbers lay the true definition of power, not ambition, not rhetoric, but consistency. At Nuremberg, the survivors of the Reich sat beneath the flags of their conquerors. When the topic of industrial defeat arose, the courtroom fell silent. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel spoke first. "We believed they could not exceed 20,000 aircraft a year. When they built 96,000, we knew the war was over." Göring added almost admiringly, "Their propaganda was modest. They could have claimed 400,000 and still told the truth." Admiral Somu Toyoda of Japan, questioned separately, offered a quieter reflection. "We thought strength meant battleships and courage. They proved strength meant factories. And Kesselring summarized what every general already knew. We lost not to their weapons, but to their system. When the shooting stopped, the machines kept running. The war economy transformed into peace within weeks, a miracle in itself. The same assembly lines that built B-17s now built trucks, tractors, and airliners. The men who had riveted wings now riveted futures. America's factories had become something new, an industrial civilization capable of building anything. Speer wrote in his memoir, "They had created an organism, not an industry. It fed on freedom, not fear." Albert Speer was one of the few Nazi leaders who understood what had truly destroyed them. He wrote, "We lost not for lack of faith or bravery, but because we could not industrialize like our enemies. We built masterpieces, they built systems." General Heinz Guderian, father of the Blitzkrieg, admitted, "We invented fast warfare. They invented fast production. That difference decided everything." The war had begun with engines and ended with factories. After the surrender, the surviving German cities were silent for months. Then a new sound replaced the bombs. The hum of reconstruction. Ironically, the very technologies that had destroyed Germany would now rebuild it. American machinery, American logistics, and American money became the foundations of recovery. Within a decade, German industry was reborn, under the same production philosophy it had once scorned. The Marshall Plan became the mirror image of Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy. The same systems that built bombers now built peace. June 1948. Berlin again under siege, this time by blockade, not bombs. The Soviet Union had cut off all ground access. 2 million civilians faced starvation. And then the sky filled once more with American planes. The C-47 Dakotas and C-54 Skymasters, descendants of the wartime arsenal. They didn't drop bombs this time. They dropped food. Every 90 seconds, another plane landed at Tempelhof. Flour, milk, medicine, a new kind of air superiority. A German witness said softly, "Once their planes brought fire, now they bring bread." That is how you know who truly won. The victory of American production extended far beyond the war itself. The innovations born in factories like Willow Run reshaped the entire world. Precision tooling became the backbone of modern industry. Assembly line logistics evolved into global supply chains. Training programs for aircraft workers became the model for technical education. The war had created the blueprint for the modern age. From the jet engine to mass consumer electronics, from aluminum alloys to logistics management. All were children of the 300,000 planes. The Axis had believed that power came from hierarchy, from will, obedience, and fear. The Allies proved it came from something simpler. Organization. A free society, when mobilized, could outproduce tyranny. Not despite its chaos, but because of it. Each company competed to innovate. Each worker labored by choice, and every invention, every shortcut, every efficiency multiplied faster than any order from above. That was America's real weapon. The freedom to improve. When historians tallied the war's numbers, the verdict was mathematical. United States, 303,717 aircraft. Germany, 119,000. Japan, 70,000. Italy, 11,000. In raw aluminum, America had produced more than the rest of the world combined. But the numbers told only half the story. The true difference lay in the quality of organization. By 1944, each American worker produced 3 times more airframe weight per month than a German worker. And they did it with shorter hours, better pay, and higher morale. It wasn't just victory through production, it was victory through belief. In the end, the Reich had been destroyed not only by bombs, but by its own arrogance. Its leaders had confused conviction with competence. They had believed propaganda more than intelligence, and ideology more than data. They thought democracy was weakness. They thought laughter was wisdom. They thought 300,000 planes was impossible. Every city reduced to ash was a correction to that delusion. When peace finally came, the sound of engines did not disappear. It changed tone. Airliners filled the skies once ruled by bombers. Cargo planes carried aid where bombers once carried death. The same factories that once armed destruction now powered prosperity. A German veteran watching a C-54 land in 1948 said quietly, "We fought to keep them out of our skies. Now we depend on them." Perhaps that is justice. Every jet, every airliner, every airport that followed was a descendant of the wartime miracle. The B-29 gave birth to the B-50, then to the B-52 Stratofortress. Machines that would guard peace for half a century. The P-51 Mustang evolved into the F-86 Sabre, then the F-100 Super Sabre. The techniques of mass production spread to every corner of the globe. The industrial victory of the 1940s became the technological civilization of the 21st century. For the defeated, reflection came with bitterness. Field Marshal von Manstein wrote, "We prepared for every possibility, except that our enemies could build without limit. We studied war dash dash. They studied production." General Göring added, "We built hundreds of perfect machines. They built thousands of good ones. And good enough, in great enough numbers, defeats perfection every time." The lesson was cruel but eternal. Post-war observers coined a phrase, "The arsenal of democracy had become the empire of efficiency." From 1945 onward, the United States produced half the world's goods. Its factories became cathedrals of the modern age, lit not by stained glass, but by welding sparks. In the ruins of Europe and Asia, people realized that the true superpower of the century was not an army, but a production line. In 1960, at a museum in Dayton, Ohio, a former Luftwaffe officer stood before a gleaming B-17 bomber. When asked what he felt, he said, "I once fought to destroy them. Now they preserve them. That tells you who deserved to win." Behind the exhibit, a plaque bore the words, "Production won the war. Freedom kept the peace." Today, only a few of those bombers remain. Their engines roar during air shows, and for a few moments, the earth trembles, as it did 8 decades ago. The crowd looks up, not in fear, but in reverence. Each sound, each vibration is a whisper from the century that learned the cost of arrogance. It says, "Never underestimate what a free people can build when survival demands it." The story began with laughter. In a marble hall in Berlin, where men in uniforms dismissed numbers as fantasy, it ended with silence. The silence of ruins and the hum of machines across an ocean. That had turned prophecy into production. Those 300,000 aircraft were not propaganda. They were destiny, a revelation written in the steel and sweat, proving that in the industrial age, factories are weapons and production is strategy. In the end, the war was not decided by who fought the hardest, but by who built the most and who believed they could.